Morning from a rather rainy and stormy Cornwall this morning. It's an incredible backdrop I've got here, but it looks like any minute there could be a thunderstorm, which is probably what the noise you can hear in the background is. So, on this morning I'm going to be asking the question, what example do you set to your kids? My name's Joe Horton, I'm the host of the High Impact Dad Show. Let's go. So, on this morning's conversation I'm going to be talking about what example you set to your kids. Now, we know that life is busy for all of us dads these days. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things that are going to take your attention. There's a lot of things that are going to affect your mood and the way that you show up. It could be something that's happened at work. It could be something that's going on in your relationship with your wife or your partner. It could be a number of things that affect how you show up. But what happens is that when we are struggling with how we show up, we get pulled between one thing or another. Which means that, look at this rain coming down, which means that when we get pulled from one thing to another, it affects how we show up as a parent to our kids, and it affects the example we set to our kids about how to behave. And I think it's important for our kids to see us go through difficulties in life and how to overcome those difficulties. But at the same time, I think it's also a good idea to set a good example to our kids as to how to behave in certain circumstances. And what I think happens in this life is that, so I'm just going to move some of my notes there because they are getting blown around by the wind here. So we get pulled from one thing to another, and we all have moods which affect how we impact with others. And usually the people that we impact with are our wife and kids. Might have to cut this video short today, it is live, so it affects how we interact with our wives and kids. But the important thing to understand here is how we behave has often been modelled to us by our own parents. So if we behave in a certain way in our relationships and towards our kids, it's often how we saw our mum and dad interacting, and often how they interacted with us. And so what we're doing is we're just repeating that same behaviour over and over again. And what people don't realise is that does happen, and it takes a bit of awareness to understand that that does happen. So what I call this is generation leap. And what I mean by generation leap is we have our parents as a reference point as to how we behave, and then we remodel that to our own children, and then they will remodel it to their children. Now, there may be some modifications that we make and our children make as to how we behave towards them because of maybe negative ways in which our parents or grandparents behave towards us. But what happens is sometimes stuff gets repeated over and over and again, and that's what I call the generation leap. Now, recognising the generation leap happens is not a case of it being like a blame game. Oh, it's my parents' fault that I turned out the way I did, or it's my grandparents' fault that my parents turned out the way they did. It's not a case of a blame game. It's a case of looking at it with a bit of awareness and saying, okay, my parents did what they did with the best information they had available to them at the time, which was X. I'm going to take the best bits of that, and then I'm going to change the bits that I think that need a little bit of tweaking, because ultimately what worked in your mum and dad's relationship is not always going to work in your relationship with your own partner or your own wife. So that's an important thing to recognise, and just be aware of it. This is not a blame game of saying, oh, actually my parents did a crap job of parenting me, or I was brought up in a terribly horrible household, when it's not actually the case. But what we're saying here is we're recognising that different generations do different things differently, and in actual fact we can break that chain by simply being aware, parking the blame at the door, and actually seeing it manifesting itself in our own behaviour and also even our partner's behaviour, and just having a frank discussion and being able to say, look, I can see where this behaviour is coming from. And we all know we do this, we all know we do it, but our ego and our pride gets in the way of saying, actually, I know where this behaviour is coming from. It's coming from my mum or my dad. So being aware is, I think, the thing that you really need to focus on. And I think the biggest thing that you can take away from this question of what example do I set to my kids is, how do I want to show up? How do I want to act? How do I want to behave in this situation? Because once you have got that awareness, then you have the choice. How do I want to show up in this situation? How am I going to break this chain now? If it was a case that my parents used to really flip out in this kind of situation, how can I show up to this situation calm, measured, with a plan? And you can replicate this in a number of different scenarios in your relationships with your wife and also your relationships with your kids. So I hope that this helps. I'm going to probably have to cut this short because you can see the lightning and thunder going in the background. But if you want to find out about more tips and a strategy for implementing some of this stuff that you hear on this show into your own life, the way to do so is by checking out my free ebook, which is over at guildofdads.com/VAM, which is the VAM blueprint. You can download that there. Make sure you listen and subscribe to this episode that goes out Monday, Wednesday and Friday each week, the High Impact Dads Show, and also check out the weekly podcast. And with that, I'll leave you. Have a great day, guys.